So, if we go right back to the very, very beginning, what initially inspired you to go to film school?
To go to film school?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My dad. My father had watched me go through making 8mm movies in the backyard for years. But when I went off to college to Penn State, I decided I just signed up for pre-psychology courses because that's what my father was, a psychologist, and I thought, well, I have to get a job now. And he came up to the college a week or so after I joined the school, and he said, what on earth are you doing? And I said, well, I have to get a job. And he said, you've been making movies since you were 12 years old. And he went to my counselors, changed all my courses to everything that they had to do with film, which way back then was not much. And that was literally the first time I thought, oh, I could make a living at this. But that's a true story. My father's responsible for me sitting here. And then I never looked back. Then I got part-time jobs at PBS stations, public broadcasting stations, and so forth, and got interrupted by the Army, but then just kept pursuing film from then on.
So when you go back to when you were 12 years old, what was it that was before that made you want to tell stories? Were you always a storyteller?
I'm part of a generation. I was always a storyteller. That is actually a good point. I used to go to the movies and then come back and tell the movies to my friends who hadn't gotten to see them. My mother was always astonished that they would sit and listen to me tell them the whole movie. But I also, I'm part of a whole generation of fantasy filmmakers who grew up with Ray Harryhausen. And his films they stood entirely apart from everything else being made because of his stop motion creatures. And my uncle gave me a clue how those were done. He's showing me how to animate a simple line on a piece of paper. And there again, I sort of never looked back. The movies I was making in the backyard were stop motion animation epics on a 12-year-old scale, and with clay dinosaurs and model tanks. And
this is really weird. My uncle was exactly the same. He used to make like animated things with dinosaurs.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
I couldn't believe he did it. You know, this was like my uncle who ran a pub, and like in his spare time,
yes,
he would sit in a tiny room for months on end, moving little bits of plasticine. And so. You mentioned Harryhausen. Was it monsters that always fascinated you?
Yes, I was one of those kids too. I loved monsters, and I'm old enough that my father took me, at 5 years old, if you can imagine, to see The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. This is the 50s sometime. And in that, Ray animated a dinosaur creature that at the end of the movie literally eats a roller coaster, my other favorite thing. So you couldn't get better than a dinosaur eating a roller coaster. And I just dreamed of being able to do that kind of thing.
Did you ever meet Ray Harryhausen?
Oh, I did, yes.
What was he like?
He was a delightful gentleman. You know, he lived in UK for most of his adult life, and but he was back in Los Angeles for one of many reprisals of his work. And he was this tall, soft-spoken, erudite gentleman, and just thoroughly enjoyed the acclaim that his films had acquired over the years.
Because he did a lot of the animation himself.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
You know, Sinbad and all of that.
Yeah, rarely did he actually have any help. Yeah.
And remind me, what studio was it that put?
Well, his movies were independently produced at a time when this was sort of strange to do. But his producer, Charles Schneer, just, you know, he loved what Ray did, and they would do these very low budget, even some of the bigger movies. Not at the very end, not the Jason or what is it? Not Jason. Well, Jason and the Argonauts is independent, but the later bigger ones, they had studio support. But Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, they did for some ridiculously low budget. And late, you know, Ray did these things in his garage, almost literally. So.
And other than Harryhausen, were there any other influences that sort of shaped the types of stories?
From movies, I was, you know, again, I was a sci-fi kid. I read science fiction, all the old guys, Robert Heinlein and Theodore Sturgeon and those people, and then I loved, you know, War of the Worlds. Howard Hawks' Thing from Another World. I always sought out fantasy movies, just about of any kind. And that was always my bent.
Recorded live. Where did the story come from of this man who's consumed by videotape?
Well, I mentioned that I got drafted into the U.S. Army, and by good fortune, they chose to recognize that I had training in film and television. So after basic training, in which I was terrible, they assigned me to the television station at West Point Military Academy to make videos and movies that were used in training the cadets. It was very fortunate for me. And there we had the big old 2-inch wide videotape machines, and that's what we shot and edited on. And periodically that tape would wear out, and one of the engineers would declare, this reel of tape is too worn, and dump it all in the dumpster. And the wind would pick it up and pull it out of the dumpster, and it absolutely looked alive. And I was stuck with that image, and it wasn't too long later, well, it was, I asked maybe 4 years, 5 years later, that I was finally I got out of the Army and went to USC and began my graduate work. And I was always stuck with that image, and I thought, wow, what if that leaped out of the dumpster and consumed somebody? Sort of like The Blob, which I had loved also, the Steve McQueen movie.
I love that film too.
So yeah, and then I went to a local TV station and said, are you throwing away any 2-inch tape? And they said, sure, there's a dumpster full, you can have it. And
so I'm just going to jump around here. What was worse, doing your national service or being on the set of Tremors, which was the hardest?
Well, the national service was nerve-wracking. This was the height of the Vietnam War, so you were always fearful that something was going to go wrong and you were going to be carted over to Southeast Asia. But I was very fortunate in that way. Tremors was difficult, but it was exhilarating. It was scary because it was Ron Underwood's first movie. Gail had moved heaven and earth to support him with Universal. We had done the same. We had said we will not sell this script without Ron attached. So everything was riding, sort of every day for the first month of production, everything was riding on something. And our very first day we fell behind, for example, because it started to snow out in the middle of the desert. And Finn
normally expect that.
Yes, and Finn Carter was freezing. The scene we were shooting was Finn was the first time she meets Val and Earl, and she's in a very light little blouse and short pants, and it wasn't below zero, but it was just bitterly cold, and so we lost endless amounts of time. We lost the sun. Our early morning didn't match our late morning, and so we fell behind on our first day, which is a red flag for the studio, So those things were very stressful because we were forever afraid that Universal was going to show up and pull the plug.
And they didn't, though, did they?
No, they got, to their credit, they got really supportive. They did send a sort of a spy to the set because Gail, as executive producer, she was there at the very beginning just to kind of make sure. She was confident. I mean, she knew that Ron was a filmmaker. She'd seen his short films, but studio executives, he had made weird little movies about a squirrel running around on a motorcycle and things. And
that was Jim Jacks, right?
Jim Jacks was our huge supporter. Jim Jacks belongs to a group of executives that, in my humble opinion, don't exist anymore. People who find unusual material, take it to the executives and sell it to them. And Jim did that. I mean, we shopped the movie all over town. Nobody bought it. Nobody wanted it. And they all passed on it except for Jim. And Nancy Roberts, our agent, was made very sure to get it to Jim specifically because she thought he would support it, and he did. So the original question was about during production. So they sent a fella to be the studio representative on set, which they don't normally do. They don't actually have a production executive sitting there on your set because sort of gauche. But they did in our case because we had fallen behind and we were having endless weather problems. And to his credit, he recognized that we knew what we were doing. He liked what the dailies were coming in, and he began to get us more support. He was the one who created this large second unit that I ended up being in control of that we hadn't really budgeted for, but we began to realize we got to have a real second unit because Ron can't possibly get all the bits and pieces he needs in a course of a production day. So, his name's getting away from me right now, but he he began to support that. He said, your second unit isn't big enough. You need more, and I'm going to get it. And then similarly, one of the most famous scenes in the movie is the car being pulled under the ground. That was cut from the script for most of production. But by the end of production, people were seeing dailies and so forth. And then Jim Jacks, I called him up one day and said, Jim, you sure you don't want that scene with the car going down? He goes, oh, send me a budget. So, and when we shot it at the very end, we weren't even on the same location. We scrounged the location near Los Angeles to shoot that scene.
Just going back to the recorded live, how long did it take to make, and where did you shoot it, and those sorts of things?
I shot it in various friends' apartments, and this many years later, I can't say how many weeks it was, but it was shot within a semester, so 8 or 10 weeks or something over that period of time, stealing time here and there. And I used a big old house in Los Angeles as the exterior, and then tried to find apartments that I felt sort of matched what the outside implied. And then I worked in my own apartment a lot when I was doing things like cutting up the carpet and whatnot. So.
And did they give you, like, because at my film school they used to give us a little budget to make the film. Is that how it worked for you guys? Did they give you a production budget, or did you have to go and hustle?
I'm trying to remember. I had to finish the film myself. I had to pay for the prints myself because they didn't love the film when it was done. They thought it was okay, but they didn't want to enter it in contests or anything. And I said, gee, I'd really like to enter it in contests. And they said, well, we're not going to pay for prints, because that was a big step in those days with film. You had to make an internegative, and you had to do all these things. And so I paid for that, and then I sent the prints off to contests myself, and then it began to win, and then they said, oh, well, that's kind of nice. I don't think I answered your question, though.
I can't remember what the question. It was just like how long you spent shooting it. But I think
yeah, it was about 8 weeks to shoot it, off and on, not a steady 8 weeks, and then and then working in people's apartments. And
how did you actually, or did whoever animated the tape?
That was me.
Obviously, it's flimsy. It's not like it's
extremely.
How did you do that?
It's like animating, if you can make a plastic bag or something. It's very, very light and airy, and it easily picks up the wind. So I always had to be in a room with all the windows closed. I couldn't have any fans or windows open or anything, because it would just blow all over the place. And then each shot was a problem-solving event of its own. There's a shot in there where it pulls a telephone cord out of a wall and then rises like a cobra. And to do that, it had to be supported by a thin fishing line here and down here to hold that shape, because otherwise it was completely floppy. I'm sorry, in that case, behind it is a piece of wire, actually. I just remembered. I was able to hide a wire taped to the back of it. So that's how I did that. But every shot was a problem-solving thing in that way because of how floppy it was.
And is there a point when you're kind of, because I used to do animation as well, and you just think, you take a step back and you just think, what on earth am I doing? Suspending bits of tape with...
There were days. I was just noticing as the film was being replayed, reminded of what it took to get there's a scene in which a gentleman throws a waste can at the blob of tape, hoping to stop it from chasing him, and the tape picks the waste can up and throws it back at him. And that was an enormous rig. I had C-stands all over the room, just out of camera range, with boards running across the C-stands. And believe it or not, Super 8 film reels with fishing line on them. And you'd take a pencil and poke it through the spokes of the reel, and you could then control how much it was moved each frame. And I needed a lot of lines to support the waste can, because it was heavy. So it got out of hand, and I think it was a day to get that 1 second.
How does it feel that, recorded live, all those years ago, you can't imagine it having a life on a platform like YouTube, and people are watching it right now and commenting on it. How does that feel?
Well, it's exciting. It's wonderful, because you just assume these things are going to disappear, and it had 2 resurrections. It began to be shown on HBO. Back in the day when HBO was using what they called interstitial programming to fill gaps between feature films. And it got a new lease on life then. And I wish more prints had been struck. There's not very many prints around, but I guess it doesn't matter. It's on YouTube forever now.
And I guess what I think is that it is the kind of you can kind of see the DNA of Tremors in that film.
I think that's probably true, because the core idea of Tremors was mine. This is not to take away anything from all the people who helped us create it, and and my writing partner, especially Brent Maddock, and I. It went through many transformations to get to where it was, but it did generate from literally a scrap of paper that I jotted down. One of my early jobs was working for the Navy, which had a base out in the middle of the desert, and very near where we ended up shooting. And I worked as a film editor on this big Navy base in a desert, and on the weekends I would hike around the base and just hang out in the desert. And there were these big mushroom-like rocks, very much like the ones we used in the movie. And one day I said, gee, wouldn't it be interesting if there was some kind of creature that could move through the sand as though the sand were water, and I couldn't get off this rock. That was 10 years before I even sold Short Circuit. So
let's talk about Tremors. And you mentioned, you had that aha moment in the desert and so on. Did you kind of immediately think, yes, there's something? Did you know in your gut that this was a great story?
No. I was always writing down ideas, and there's still a file folder somewhere full of them. And I was, as I say, I was years away from any sort of success. I hadn't even landed my first animation jobs in Hollywood. This editing job in the Navy was the first real job I got in the film business. And I went back, and somewhere along the line, Ron Underwood, who was already working in the educational film business, said, ooh, it would be nice to use stop motion, because nobody does that in these short little films for schools and libraries. And they're very simple, how to look up a word in the dictionary. So we did an animated version of how to look up the word in the dictionary. In the industry, which was not huge, but it was our universe, was quite impressed, and we made great money on that one little film, and I continued to work for some years doing that sort of thing.
And so how did you meet Ron?
At USC Film School. He was undergraduate and I was graduate, and Brent and I always liked to say he was smarter than us because he left and went and got work. We continued plodding along doing our graduate projects.
And you're still good buddies to this day?
Yes, all of us are in touch all the time. Brent and I are still writing 30-some years later.
The writing process for Tremors, when you first put pen to paper, what did you like about the writing process, and what did you dislike about the writing process?
The writing of Tremors went fairly smoothly in some weird steps. My partner, Brent Maddock, and I work well together. We don't yell and scream at each other much. And but the genesis of the project was us saying, we're really tired of being screenwriters of fairly big movies at this time and having absolutely no say in how they're done and hating how they come out. And our agent, Nancy Roberts, said, well, you're talking about producing. Writers have no power in Hollywood. So tell you what, let's go through your file cabinet and pick an idea. And she was the one who picked what she called land sharks. And she said, we'll pitch that and try to sell it with Ron attached. So we pitched it and no one would buy it. So we wrote a treatment and no one would buy it. So Nancy said, well, guys, you're going to have to write the screenplay. I don't see any other way to sell this thing. And that's when we got into the process that, again, it's fairly smooth for us. We don't anguish too much. I mean, well, we anguish, but we don't yell and scream. The biggest issue with Tremors, which went through 7 drafts, was finding that tone of comedy and horror. We didn't know we were sort of creating a genre at the time, but it is kind of heartening to me years later to hear people talk up, studio executives say, I want something with that Tremors tone. Yeah, it's not easy to do. And the first drafts were too funny. There was too much comedy.
Oh, really?
And by the 7th draft, we were pulling comedy out, pulling it out.
And what kind of, was it like gags you were taking out?
Gags at the expense of the monsters, we realized didn't work. People saying inappropriate things that no one would really say. We got very slavish about saying, well, what would someone who was really frightened really say? And that's where lines like Bert yelling at the creature in his basement, broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you? That's where lines like that came from. And they're hugely successful because it feels real, I think, to the audience.
And that line kind of really defines his character.
It does indeed. After all, it's the greatest moment of his life. He literally uses all of the tools he's collected to save his life.
And in terms of actually the writing process, and this is kind of, you know, in this day and age, everything goes back and forth over email. How did that work with you communicating?
Well, this was a long time ago, you know. This is before cell phones. My partner, the writing of Tremors, you know, technologically was a very slow process. I think by then we each had a modem and a computer, probably a CPM computer, and we lived 20 or 30 miles apart. So we often tried to work on the phone, and occasionally we would try to send the script, to what you would think of as email, to one another, but this required getting on the phone, getting a dial tone, having the computers link up, and then praying that no one called for the next hour and a half. It took an hour and a half to send 120 pages to each other, and if someone called, you had to start all over. It's a process that, writing a screenplay is a process that takes each writer a certain amount of time. Some people are faster than others, but there's sort of a number of steps that you seem to have to go through.
And when you wrote the first script, how much of the Graboids kind of backstory did you generate at that time in terms of the origins, which has never been explained, but did you have all that information in your back pocket of where they came from and what their sort of motivation was and that kind of thing?
We had a lot of discussions about whether or not to explain where the Graboids came from. And in truth, we did not pick one. I, in particular, coming from my background of just loving science fiction and horror films, knew that there were only 4 sources. There's only 4 possibilities, you know. They are created in a laboratory, they are from outer space, they are metaphysical, magical, and they're natural. And all of them are disappointing. The minute you name one, people go, oh. And so we thought, can we get away with never saying? Because again, we backed into that from these people would never find out, you know, unless we did something strange. I will tell you this story. Talking about where the Graboids came from, somewhere along the line in the pre-production process, the studio executives said, you know, aren't you ever going to tell where they came from? We really want to know. So we went back to the writing and we said, all right, well, we'll write the alien scene. We'll find Bert, when he's out searching, he'll find he'll find a crashed spaceship, and then he'll report that back to the townsfolk. And we put that scene in, and at the next production meeting, the crew rose up. All the production heads said, what is this scene? This is terrible. So I called up the head of the studio then and said, you know, they hate this scene. So, oh, all right, I don't like it, but I want to know where they come from.
So there was pressure from Universal to actually explain, lay it all out.
Yeah, to lay it all out. And we wrote the scene and then took the scene back out. Then to their credit, you know, they let us.
Just going back to the sort of the genesis of Tremors, can you explain who the key people were and what they did, like Gail and Nancy and yourself, to bring Tremors to life? Who were all those people and what did they do?
The way Tremors finally came together was that we wrote the entire screenplay, and then our agent Nancy began marshaling her forces to get as much energy behind it as she could before she, as we used to say, took it out, before she took it out to the town.
And so can you tell us who Nancy was?
Nancy Roberts was our agent at the time. She had supported us since Short Circuit, and she, as I said, she had chosen this particular subject for this was our movie that we were going to creatively control. So once we finished the script, she began putting this program together. I mean, she really produced the movie, behind the scenes, if you want to, if it should be said that way. And so she knew which studio executive she was going to send it to. She knew that Jim Jacks would probably be the one who bought it. She knew at Disney who would pass and why. And this was the way she handled her business.
And there's a story there. I read something in Jonathan Melville's book about the head of Disney. I can't remember his name at the time. It said didn't like dust and dirt movies or something like that.
That is correct. When Nancy sent the script to Disney, she said, "It's going to come back and no, don't be upset. There's an executive there who just hates dust and the whole Western thing." And that's exactly what came back. Well, actually, that's not exactly what came back. I was in the room when she got the call, which was a pass, and they passed in a very general way. "It's not right for us at this time." And she said something like, "Cut the crap, so-and-so doesn't like dust." And on the other end, they said, "How do you know that?"
So that was Nancy's role. Can you talk to us about Gail? Who was Gail Ann Hurd, and how does she fit into the story?
Gail Ann Hurd got involved partly because of Nancy. Nancy needed support for Ron Underwood, our first-time director. And she knew that Gail, who was a down-in-the-trenches filmmaker, would recognize that Ron's short films showed that he knew what he was doing. They were strange, educational films. To a studio executive, they didn't say anything, but to Gail, they did. And I don't remember how Nancy got in touch with Gail and got her to look at Ron's films, but that was the huge thing that Gail did for us, is she literally came to Universal and said, "Look, this guy can direct, leave him alone, greenlight the movie." It was a huge moment that Gail was responsible for.
And she's kind of been, I think also in Jonathan's book, he says that she's like the godmother of Tremors. Is that
That is true, yes, because she supported us at a key moment, where everything was always hanging in the balance, but at that particular moment that something was hanging in the balance, Gail was there to push us over the right way.
And are you still in touch with Gail these days?
Not very much. We pitched her something a few years ago, but we don't have regular contact with Gail.
And you mentioned Short Circuit, and this is kind of rewinding and probably repeating some of the things you've said, but that was a hugely successful movie. So I guess your ticket was really hot in Hollywood. So getting this movie greenlit was a walk in the park, right?
When we sold Short Circuit, we suddenly rocketed onto the studio radar, and did quite well for a number of years. But in those first few years, we had this frustration that we had no control over our movies. We were big ticket Hollywood writers that they were coming to for rewrites and buying original material from. And that's when our agent, Nancy Roberts, said, "Well, if you want control, you're going to have to write something, and then we're going to have to attach you to it as producers," and so on and so on. And we had no idea how difficult it was going to be to sell Tremors at that point, because we said, "Hey, we're big, successful Hollywood writers. We should be able to sell our movie." It was a long haul before we finally got it to Jim and the sale.
Why do you think it was so hard getting that sold?
Tremors was a hard sale because it was more strange than we realized. I talked a while back about the fact that we wrote it with more comedy in it than ended up in it. And we kept pulling comedy out of it, trying to make it genuinely scary. But it was still a strange blend. And it also harked back to a kind of movie, these B science fiction movies that studio executives didn't know. They don't go to the movies and watch old movies. And Jim Jacks did know that. He knew exactly what it was having fun with, and that genre. But it was a strange animal, and it continued to be a strange animal. The marketing department, who did not see it until it was finished, said, "Good heavens, what do we do with this? Is it a monster movie or a comedy? We just don't know how to sell this."
And so, once it was greenlit, can you remember what the next stages were in the process of making the film?
Well, we moved into pre-production and we began designing the creatures. That is, we enlisted Tom Woodruff and Alec Gillis of ADI, an effects company. And those two we met through Gail Ann Hurd. She was involved in all the steps of pre-production. She brought us our cinematographer who had worked with her on another movie. She suggested Tom and Alec of ADI, and we hit it off right away with them because they think like we do. Tom and Alec designed their creatures based on reality. No matter how outlandish the creature is, they have a wonderful understanding of biology and sort of how things would really, if you had a large underground worm, what it would kind of have to look like. And the very first drawing they brought us, we just fell over and said, "Oh my God, it's a graboid." So, because we didn't really know what they looked like.
So you didn't in your mind think, well, they need to be brown or look like this, or you just sort of let Alec kind of...
When you talk about what the graboids came to look like, it's embarrassing how little there is in the script to tell you. The script does say that they have a really weird mouth that opens like a flower. And that little description came out of my desire that they not look the way you expect. I wanted them to look really strange. So I just wanted to have a strange mouth at least, because we knew they had to look like a worm. So. But it was Tom and Alec all the way who came up with that remarkable design.
You've mentioned Jim Jacks a couple of times, and I've read some things about him, that he was a bit of a curmudgeon and a desk banger. Can you describe Jim Jacks for us?
Jim Jacks was an executive at Universal, and he is the one who single-handedly, and as far as the studio side of the equation goes, who single-handedly pushed Tremors forward. He championed it from day one as soon as he saw the script. And he was a character. He was notorious literally for banging his fists on the table and screaming at executives, "You have to make these movies." I don't know if he had to do that on our behalf, but he did it for many movies. He was the one who brought John Woo to America. He did many extraordinary things. And yes, character, sort of scary at times when he got mad.
But he had your back.
Absolutely, it's the one you want in your corner.
Okay, so let's talk about the graboids. You said that you, other than having like the mouth like a flower, that you didn't really give many details to the designers. And when you saw the first designs, can you talk a little bit more about what that felt when you first saw the drawings for the graboids?
When Tom and Alec brought us the first drawing of a graboid, we just fell over. We were just delighted because it's a scary step. What is it really going to look like? You're going to commit to this, and people are going to build it, and we were just delighted. That first drawing, there were some other parts to it, and there was one bump in the road. Originally, the graboid, which has this strange beak, they decided it would probably protect itself with a kind of fleshy covering. This is absolutely true. And the first drawing Gail saw had that covering, and she burst out laughing and said, "You've got to be kidding. You know what that looks like." And geeky guys that we were, we said, "No, it's the monster, it's the monster." She said, "That's going to go." Speaking of we were speaking before about what impact Gail had on the movie. She made the graboids look a lot more like they look.
And a lot less phallic.
Yes, a lot less phallic.
So did the studio get involved in what the graboids look like? Did they influence it in any way?
Not much. Not at all to my memory. I don't remember the studio having much input on what the Graboids looked like.
Graboids, they were not small little models when you took them out to the desert. Can you talk a bit about how complex or strenuous it was transporting those Graboids?
When it came to actually shooting with the Graboids, and remember there's no CG in this movie, these are all, in some cases, 8 foot tall, 100-pound puppets with guys inside, guys outside, running cables and so forth. We thought we were being tremendously clever in saying that they're mostly underground and that we don't see them very often. And that was part of our pitch, because this will be a low-budget movie and you only see the monsters once in a while, and the rest of the time we just imply that they're there. We had no idea how difficult it was going to be to get these things in and out of the ground and to get them to work with dirt all over them and dirt getting into their mechanisms. And another, rocky point early in production was the very first time that a Graboid burst out of the ground, because it burst out once and never again. The elevator broke and that was it for the day.
You created that. What did that sort of feel like, to think you've created this unique world of utter madness in the desert?
I have to say, I never get tired of walking onto a set and seeing that a bunch of very talented people have built something that I scribbled onto a piece of paper. That was true on Short Circuit. We wrote a big scene in that where robots blow up a tank, and I walked onto the set and the director said to me, "There's your damn tank, Wilson." And when we were doing Tremors, that experience was magnified, because the Graboids are very impressive. Like, as I was saying earlier, they're 8 foot tall. And when they're up there waving and their beaks are going, and usually it's Tom Woodruff inside doing things in this incredibly claustrophobic environment. It's a real thrill. It's goofy, but it's it's exhilarating.
It's a good way to make a living.
It is a great way to make a living.
And did you ever get inside a Graboid yourself?
Certainly I myself never got inside a Graboid. If you can imagine what Tom Woodruff went through, it's hard to describe. The first few times we did these burst up moments, we buried Tom alive for up to an hour. There was a giant shaft and an elevator in the shaft, and the elevator was powered pneumatically. And first he got inside the Graboid, then we set this on the elevator, took him down into a hole 10 foot deep. Then there was an endless amount of dressing, because we had this elaborate system to cover the hole with something that would break and give way, but wouldn't let too much dirt in, because the more dirt was on the Graboid, the heavier it was and the harder it was for the elevator to lift it. So Tom was in there and he had a headset, and I don't remember if he had a video camera. He may have had a video camera, but he had a headset. I'm sorry, yeah, Tom Woodruff was in there, and then Alec Gillis was above ground talking to Tom and encouraging, "We're almost ready, Tom, just hang in there. We're really, really about to shoot. Really we are. We're just putting on the last bit of dressing." And then finally he would get his cue and the elevator would shoot. Well, the elevator never did shoot up. That's what we hoped would happen. And then he would wave the jaws around, and then we would cut. Then we'd go for take 2.
So what would you rather work with, a pneumatic Graboid or real animals?
I think any filmmaker, if asked whether they would work with real animals or puppets of some form, probably select puppets. Shooting with animals is crazy, because they never do what you expect. They don't stay on camera and so forth. Puppets are fun because your puppeteers are all actors. And if you have the time to work, the way we did Tremors, a lot of Tremors is really just finding bits and pieces. Because the Graboids were difficult to control. Even the individual tentacles were difficult to control. They were incredibly elaborate. They were beautiful pieces of engineering. The tentacles worked really, really well. But it took 3 guys to run one. One was on the head, one was sort of on the neck, and one was on the base. And to get it to just do, this took, 30 minutes of experimentation. And then it didn't always do that. So you just shoot and shoot and shoot. And then you go, ooh, that was it.
Because the 3 of them have all got to be in sync.
Yes, they all have to work in sync. So they have to rehearse like ballerinas to get something that looks lifelike.
You mentioned briefly about the marketing for Tremors, and I think I'm right in saying that you were very keen not to show the Graboids on the poster. Why were you keen not to show the Graboids on the poster?
We had going into the movie.
And if you could frame it, say,
I'm getting there. Going into the movie, we realized in our script that we had structured it to have a big surprise in it. And that developed over the first few drafts. And the surprise was, it's not these snake-like creatures, which are the tentacles that come out of the mouth. The surprise is, oh, good heavens, that's only part of a much larger creature. And we clung to that idea, and we shot and edited the movie to support that idea. And then when marketing finally saw the movie, Universal's marketing department finally saw the movie and came to us with their first poster, it was literally a Jaws poster with the full-size Graboid coming up like Jaws. And we freaked out. We said, no, you can't have the Graboid on the poster. That's a huge surprise in the movie. And they eventually conceded, well, maybe that was true. And so they did the poster that we got, which we were not happy with either, which was a giant tentacle coming up with added teeth in its mouth.
Can you kind of explain what it was about the shoot that made it so arduous?
Tremors was a difficult movie to shoot. I mean, just physically difficult. And all movies have their difficulties, but choosing to shoot in the desert, in broad daylight, in the dirt, with monsters and machinery that was susceptible to the dirt and forever breaking down was really hard. And then on top of that, the desert itself did not cooperate in the sense that we had snow on some days, we had hail on some days, and then later in production we had 105, 110 degree days. And we had people sick from getting heat, not heat stroke, but, heat suffering. And we had an enormous dry lake bed nearby us, and periodically the somewhat toxic dust would boil up off the lake bed and just envelop the set to the point where we couldn't shoot. And there are pictures of me somewhere wearing a dusk mask trying to find my way to a car. And we had the jets from the Navy base that I worked at all those years before, which was not too far away, flying over us fairly frequently. Many, many takes were ruined by low-flying jets blasting overhead. This was so long ago that we had one telephone on the set. It was a radio telephone rented from some fellow there in that valley where we worked, near Lone Pine, California. And that was a difficult thing. And it was there primarily because Kevin Bacon's wife was pregnant with their first child. And he did not want to be out of touch because we were literally, there were no cell phones. I mean, there was no way for him to know that Kira might have gone, into labor. And in fact, that happened in the middle of a shot one day. I remember very well the scene we were shooting. Kevin and Fred were on top of the Pepsi cooler in Walter Chang's store, and the runner came running in from the production office and said, "Kira's going into labor." Ron called cut. Kevin ran out the door.
How long were you on location for? It was all on location, right, wasn't it?
It was all on location except for the interiors, of which there are very few in a movie that's all outdoors in the desert. The interiors of Chang's Market and the interiors of Burt's were shot back in studios in Los Angeles. And we shot for, I want to say 7 weeks, but I have forgotten.
And so you mentioned how kind of arduous it was on set. Were there any kind of moments where you got some lucky breaks? Like, the sun came out unexpectedly, or was it just all complete grind from start to finish?
It probably wouldn't be fair to say that every day was a nightmare and that nothing ever went right. I'm sure something must have gone right, but what sticks in your head, of course, are the days where things were terrifying and falling apart. I do know that on the very first day, when it began to snow and we thought we were going to be stopped literally before lunch on our first day, the snow stopped and the sun did come out. It was still bitterly cold, but we were able to finish the scene.
And so you shot this in, was it late 89, I think?
Late 89. Yeah, we released in January, April actually. We started shooting in April of 89.
And Kevin did a lot of his own stunts, right? Which I think probably now might not happen, wasn't there?
Kevin Bacon was very athletic, probably is still. Kevin Bacon was very athletic, and yes, he encouraged us to let him do as much as possible as far as stunts go. And he did quite a few athletic things. It always surprise me now when I watch the movie. I think, look at him go.
I think he's about to do one now, actually, on the screen. You mentioned earlier about the, Jim Jackson, how he got the kind of the 1950s kind of metaphors that you were putting in the film. But I think you've said that you wanted to avoid some 1950s classic tropes with Tremors. Can you explain what it was you were trying to avoid with Tremors and why?
You know, when we set out to write this script, we knew that we were doing a 50s monster movie, really. And I loved that idea. But at the same time, very early on, we said, okay, we are going to avoid certain things that are creaky about those movies. We're going to avoid women who are just eye candy, who don't know anything. And we're going to not have the local sheriff is the hero. It's not going to be the local National Guardsman who's the hero. It's not going to be an authority figure at all. And we backed into then, well, who is the least likely hero in this little town? And we thought, well, it'd be great if it's just these two handymen who people ask to fix everything. And now they're asked to fix this problem. Similarly with the character of Rhonda, it was really important to us that if she's going to be a scientist, which she is, she's a grad student, but she's a scientist, that she's really going to know her stuff. And she's going to be smarter than everybody else, and nobody's going to be telling her what to do.
On the set of Tremors, with all that adversity, my impression was that it was very much like, it was very kind of like a muck-in culture. Everybody rolled up their sleeves. Everybody was working to the same goal. Is that the case?
We were extraordinarily fortunate with our cast and our crew. People came on to Tremors, and we were all living out in the desert together. First of all, we took over all the little hotels and this little motels in this little town of Lone Pine. And every crew person, I swear, supported the movie above and beyond, contributed ideas to solving problems, and it was very much a team effort and exhilarating in that way, with departments helping each other, because it doesn't have to go that way. There's unions and there's departmental infighting, and there's ways that departments get in each other's way and they can't help it. So it can go south on you completely the other way. In our case, it was delightful. Well, here's one example. The production designer, this is the fellow who does the blueprints of the set and oversees construction. He came up with the entire special effects gag of the rooftop collapsing on the store. The effects people were overwhelmed. They had so many problems to solve. They said, great, if you can do it. He designed and built the mechanism that collapses the roof and uncollapses it so that it can reshoot in about 15 minutes.
And can you tell us who he was? Was that Ivo?
Our production designer was Ivo Cristante, and he was just a delightful force on the movie. He was always challenging us to even be sure we were making the best movie. The first time he saw the desert location, he didn't like it because there were too many low bushes. He said, isn't this supposed to be like Gunga Din? Isn't it just pure sand? That's the element. And we were, well, Ivo, this is really the desert. My partner and I had camped out in the desert a lot. This was the desert we imagined, but it wasn't what he imagined. So he was quite frustrated for days trying to figure out how this was going to work and how he was going to support it. He got on board. But every step of the way, Ivo was throwing out ideas, incredibly creative force.
And let's talk about Michael Gross. How did you first meet him? And because he's been with he's boy to man, 30 years of working on Tremors.
Yeah.
I bet you know some stories about Michael.
When it came time to cast the movie, now you have to remember the studio's nervous about this. It's not a hugely expensive movie, but every movie is a gamble. And they said, okay, you really have to look at some cast members that will support this movie. We would love to get some people from television. We would love to get other people that support this. We had Kevin Bacon. That was another crisis. If we didn't get Kevin, there was no movie, but we got Kevin. And they said, okay, now we want to flesh out the cast with good people. So the first one that comes up is Michael Gross. And we're going, Michael Gross from Family Ties? This is what you're talking about? So, okay. They said, you don't have to take him. You have to read him. So Michael came in, and he thought he was being brought in because he had just done a TV movie about some terribly violent event where he was the villain that shot a bunch of FBI agents or something. You'd have to look up what it was. I don't remember. But he thought that's why we wanted him. We were reading him because Universal said we have to. And he read for Bert, and he had planned it all out, and he read beautifully. We just went, oh my God, okay, this is Bert. We can't believe it. The good fortune on casting is it can't be overstated for every single member.
And was he good fun on set?
I've talked a lot about how hard the shoot was. I should modify that by saying that the atmosphere on set was great fun. We enjoyed the trials together. The cast worked extremely well together. People were very supportive of each other, and we had many just really funny moments on the set because it was, especially partway through when we began to know that the movie was working.
Can you talk about some of those the funny moments that stick in your mind that happened on set?
Some of the funniest moments on set for me came with Finn Carter, who played Rhonda, because she came straight out of live television. She was a soap opera star, and she was used to doing a show that ran 5 days live, like theater, and she would shoot how many hours? I guess an hour a week or a day. I mean, an hour a day. However they did those live shows, I can't even fathom it. So it was very confusing to Finn to be shooting out of order, and we had to shoot out of order because of all the technological problems we were facing. And she would get more and more flustered over the course of the shoot and just go to Ron and say, Ron, what is going on? Am I scared or am I not scared? I just want to know what's happening right now. She was unbelievable in the moment. As soon as Ron told her what the moment was, she could turn it on and off like a switch. But I remember poor Finn being confused a lot of the time.
And were there any kind of funny moments with Kevin or Michael?
We had a funny moment with Mike. We had a funny moment with Michael Gross because everyone knew that the line in his basement that he says, which is, "You broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you?" We knew that was an important line in the shooting. It read well in the script. It read well in production meetings. And so on that day, Brent and I were hovering behind Ron Underwood, the director, because everybody was nervous about that line. And Michael did the scene, did the line, and then we'd run up to Ron and whisper, and then we did it again. And eventually Michael came over and said, look, can we all talk together about the line? He was very frustrated seeing us whispering to Ron about, didn't know what we were saying.
And what was the energy like that Reba McEntire brought to the movie? Because she was, she's a singer. She talks about it being a very kind of authentic role for her. She wasn't worried about not having makeup and so on, or having dust in her hair.
Reba McEntire was another just complete gift out of the blue to us. And here again, this is Universal said to us, hey, we got an idea, you should read this country music star. Well, is she an actress? Well, maybe. But boy, just think of what she'll bring to the movies, and millions of fans. And we went, okay. And again, we were just so doubtful. For every woman that read for the part of Heather Gummer, we had a shotgun in the office. And one of the things they had to do was work the shotgun, a pump action shotgun, which she does brilliantly in the film. Well, she really is a country girl. She had no problem with that. And she floored us with her reading. We went, my God, she really can. She can do it. She was one of those people that could just step into acting. It's not an automatic thing. The fact that you have a stage presence doesn't mean you can act. So we were delighted with her reading. And at the end of her reading, she came in full country music with big hair and makeup. And Ron said, you know, I don't know how to ask this. This is kind of really a rough and tumble woman. You know, I don't think she would wear a lot of makeup. Would you be comfortable with us, you know, not doing as much? And she said, well, honey, as long as you're aware, there's a lot of freckles under here.
And how was Kevin on set? I mean, obviously, you know, he was stressed about having, you know, his wife going into labor at any moment. Was he good fun to work with?
Oh, Kevin was great fun to work with. Kevin is supremely professional. And he had a lot of experience coming in. You know, he was our big star. And Kevin Bacon was just professional every step of the way. We in fact did not know that he was nervous about the movie, upset about a couple of movies back that hadn't done well, not sure at all he should be doing a movie with rubber monsters. And we never got a hint of any of that. He just went through the movie. He like Finn, worried about one thing. Kevin Bacon worried about how scared to be at what point. It bothered him that you meet creatures early in the movie, and then you meet more creatures, and you meet bigger creatures, and then the town starts to fall apart. And he would say to Ron, he said, you know, I can only be so scared. I don't want to blow all my scared early in the movie. So you need to keep me grounded on how scared I can be till we get to the end.
You led the second unit on Tremors, is that right?
Yes.
You were directing that directorial debut.
My directing second unit sort of fell on me. I was a producer, and I had no intention of doing that when we went into the movie. And it turned out that we realized early on that we couldn't get through the movie if we didn't have a second unit. And I was quite nervous about taking on the role. Ron's pitch to me was, well, this is how we've always worked, because he hired me years before to do animation in films that were being sold to schools and libraries. So he would shoot the live action, I would fill in the animation, we'd make sure that it all matched up. He said, this is what we've always done, just go do that. And the first time I shot second unit, there was maybe 5 people involved, maybe 10 people with crew and so forth. We shot a little scene with Rhonda that we had not been able to get with the main unit. And that was exhilarating and fun, and I was relieved, and we did that. And then, as I said somewhere earlier, Universal began to see that we were going to need a bigger second unit to pull this movie together, because the main unit just couldn't get all the bits and pieces. So I ended up with this crew that was half the size of the main unit's crew on some things. When we were shooting with the bulldozer and stuff, I had effects people and transportation people, drivers and trucks and all kinds of stuff going on. That being said, I got quite enamored of the process. And by the end, I knew I wanted to be a director.
And can you identify, when you were directing the second unit, the scenes that you're most proud of from
Let's see. My unit shot a lot. Oops, I can't do that. Yes. The second unit that I was sort of in control of shot a lot of fairly major pieces. In Bert and Heather's basement, We shot a lot of the close-ups of bullets hitting the monster, when Heather shooting at the floor with her shotgun and blowing the tentacle in half, we would shoot that. When Rhonda, this is a scene that I like a lot, when Rhonda trips over a chunk of barbed wire out in front of the store, a monster comes up, she's thrashing on the ground, the monster knows he's there, and the monster gets a hold of the barbed wire and sort of reeling her in like a fish. The main unit shot, of course, Finn and wide shots of the action, but it was a very complicated thing to do, and the monsters, like I say, have up to 8 or 10 people working on them, puppeteers that were hiding somewhere. So the second unit then moved in after the main unit left, and we worked probably a full day getting all the bits and pieces needed to finish that sequence.
One thing that, when we were talking about the 1950s and the tropes that you wanted to avoid, you said something really, really interesting about you didn't want to just have female characters that just look pretty. It's quite empowering that you did that. You created strong female leads that are believable, they're three-dimensional.
When we thought about the character of Rhonda, it was really important to us that she not be the sort of B-movie dumb girl, or even worse, the B-movie scientist who doesn't really know anything. And it was really important to us that she be smarter than everybody else and know more about these creatures than everybody else. And Brent and I, my writing partner and I, have always written strong woman characters because we like them. But it's nice all these years later for people to say Rhonda is among the first sort of empowered female characters, at least in the science fiction horror world. I don't know how true that is, but I like to hear it because it was a very conscious decision on our part.
And your kind of learnings, when you look back on Tremors, what were your learnings from making the film? What did you take from it that you've taken with you for the rest of your career?
Whenever you make any movie, of course, you learn from it, or you should. And on Tremors, again, the production was so grueling that if anything, we probably think about, let's not write anything that's going to back us into that corner that's going to be so hard. That's not really a good way to approach it, I don't think. But I do think that's in the back of our minds whenever we write. The other thing that you always take away from a production, at least as writers, is you're always thinking about dialogue and lines and what played and what didn't, and I wish I could have rewritten that line if I'd just seen how it was going to play. But writers always anguish over that.
And the name Tremors for the movie, you weren't particularly fond of that.
It is funny how the movie ended up getting named. For a while it was called Dead Silence, and that was at Gail's behest. Not because she wanted that name, it had something to do with things that I don't understand very well. I think we started out as non-union or something. I'm probably not supposed to say that. But we were sort of Dead Silence Productions. But the title that we had put on the movie, we were thinking of calling it Graboid, but then we thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. Nobody knows what that is. So the title that we put on the script was Beneath Perfection. And we thought, well, that's kind of quirky and hip. And what does that mean? And then, of course, the town is perfection. And we actually had crew jackets made up that Kevin still has. I just recently saw a video with Kevin wearing his crew jacket that said Beneath Perfection. And the story I was told, I was not there, but the head of Universal, Tom Pollock, when he was given his jacket, as he would always be given a crew jacket, threw it across his office and said, this movie will not be called anything nearly that bizarre. That's what we heard back. And I don't know if he was that demonstrative, but Universal at some point declared it will be called Tremors. That's the best you've come up with, and there's no discussion about this.
And even kind of naming the species, graboids, was that your invention as well?
The word graboid was our invention, and it took us so long to come up with it that we put it into the movie. We have Walter Chang and the boy Melvin coming up with the name in the movie, because we struggled and struggled with it. We couldn't, even now, I don't know that graboid is such a great name, but.
Where did it come from? Were you kind of like, doing a David Bowie thing and chopping up bits of text, or did you, how did you actually come up with it?
We came up with the name graboid just based on what the creatures do. We just kept saying, well, they grab you from under the ground. They snatch you from under the ground. And I don't know how the oid got attached to it, but, oid is better than grabbers. So.
Yeah. And I guess oid is kind of almost like a little nod to the 50s, like asteroids and things like that.
It might be that. I don't know where it came from, to tell you the truth.
And when home entertainment came along, that is probably why we're here to this day talking about Tremors. Can you talk about the role of home entertainment and videotapes in the context of Tremors?
From a career perspective, it's hard to overstate the importance of the invention of the VHS cassette and the blooming of the home video market to us in our career in terms of what we got to do or have gotten to do. When Tremors came out, it was a moderate success. It didn't lose money, but the head of Universal did call me and said, well, we just blew it. And he was quite disappointed because they knew it was good. But it just kind of came out and went away. And we were sad, and Kevin was bothered by that. It was another, as far as he was concerned, it was a flop, and he said so on television, much to my distress. And it wasn't until years later that this home video division of Universal called us up and said, we need Tremors 2. And we're saying, this was years later. And we said, what? We must have a Tremors 2. Aren't you aware of what's going on out there? Why, we could sell an empty box called Tremors 2. This was a backhanded compliment, I thought. But because of that, people continued to go back and look at the original Tremors. And Tremors 2 did quite well in the home video market. And I think it's the reason that Tremors became a cult hit. I don't think that it would have had there not been the opportunity to watch it on video over and over again. People now have Tremors parties and show it to their children and grandchildren, people who were not born long before the Tremors movie was made.
Because it's kind of interesting, because we take it for granted now. There are probably 15 devices in this room, and each one of them are capable of playing Tremors at a moment's notice. And it's just trying to remember what it was like to have that VCR in your home, where you could stop and pause and rewind and record and change. And it was kind of the beginning of on-demand television, really.
It's true. The video cassette was the beginning of on-demand television. You could get a movie anytime and watch it anytime. That was extraordinary.
In fact, I've got one here. Will you get my... Look at this.
Ha! Wow.
There we go.
Wow. Look at that. The monster movie that breaks new ground. Which edition is this anyway?
I think that's like a rental store edition, because it's a bigger box.
It is a bigger box. It's a bigger,
That's
sturdier
what you
box.
get in Blockbusters rather than the retail. And sadly, I did order a laser disc as well, but it didn't come in time, which is disappointing.
It's what?
I ordered a laser disc as well.
And
it didn't come in time.
you could still order the laser disc?
eBay.
Well, eBay, of course. Speaking of changes in technology, yes. If it ever existed, it still exists.
And 30 years later, Tremors is still very much alive and kicking and loved by fans all over the world. And you mentioned you have a direct relationship with with the Tremors fans? I guess it's like Doctor Who. When you create a sci-fi world, it captures people's imagination, and they will they want to ask all those questions. And what are the kind of strangest questions you've been asked by fans over the years?
You know, I was saying a little bit earlier that I answer questions online that I get emailed from fans. And they're still coming in, and they're still new. To the fans' credit, I must say, they must read all of the answers I've written over the last 20-some years, whenever the internet got going, because rarely do I get a repeat question that they haven't read the answer. In fact, they sometimes elaborate on the answer, and it's delightful what they ask. What is old Fred growing in his garden just before the graboid pulls him down? Now, that was one I fielded to my production designer, Ivo Cristanti. Ivo, do you remember what the little plastic plants were in the garden? Steve, I think they were corn. I'm not sure. Where did Val get his belt buckle that says Val? Ron Underwood remembered that. It came from a secondhand store in Los Angeles. The clothing department brought it to him. What direction does the door of Bert's bunker face? I need to know. I'm building a quarter scale model. I said, well, I can tell you what direction the set faced. I don't know. But it just goes on and on. And then a recurring one. Where do we get Val and Earl's Jeep? It was a strange military version of the Jeep Gladiator. We had two of them. They didn't even look alike. If you watch the movie closely, you'll see that they don't look alike. And I don't know how to tell you where to find one. They're very rare.
Do people ask about Bert's baseball caps?
We have a lot of Bert fans, a lot of fans of Bert Gummer, and there's a lot they want to know, sometimes a little unsettling, given Bert's survivalist nature.
In what way is it unsettling?
Really weird specific questions about the firearms and how we got them and where we got them and so forth. We made very sure when we did the original Tremors that Bert did not have any illegal guns. Our feeling was that Bert is he's not an anarchist, he's a survivalist. So even though people think he has machine guns, he doesn't. You may think that everything is illegal in America, but that's not strictly true. Machine guns are licensed, and so Bert does not have a machine gun. He has semi-automatic rifles.
And wasn't it kind of central that you insisted that he never points a gun at people, only the graboids?
That's something that the idea that Bert never points a gun at a person is something that grew out of, first of all, normal safe gun handling. Our feeling was that Bert is a responsible gun owner, and he's going to handle guns safely. And so we made sure that the armorers on the movie, taught Michael how he should handle the guns. So Michael's always very careful about what he's doing, and that became important to Michael, especially as the issue of gun control has become more and more volatile. Michael likes to make the point. There is only one moment in Tremors when he inadvertently points a gun at someone, and that's when Melvin comes stumbling out of the store with the tentacle wrapped about his neck, screaming, and then Bert is furious because he's actually come close to shooting. So that actually plays into the drama pretty well.
What advice would you give to young filmmakers who are inspired by Tremors?
People always ask me, if I wanted to do something like Tremors, if I wanted to make movies like Tremors, what should I do? And that's always, that question comes up for any film that any person is interested in or enjoys. And it's so hard to answer for me, because my pat answer is, well, you can do the opposite of everything I did and succeed perfectly well. I had a few good breaks. The main thing you can do is do your homework. If you're writing, write more than one script. Don't write and rewrite the same script over and over. Set it aside, write something new, set that aside. The first movie that I sold, that me and my partner sold, was Short Circuit, and that was the 7th screenplay that we wrote. The first 6 were not good and never went anywhere. And if you're filmmaking, first of all, I say, enjoy what you have available to you. It doesn't cost you a fortune to buy film or to rent a camera. Go out with your phone and edit on your phone. And you can learn a huge amount about shooting, editing, lighting with your phone, and should. And I'll just throw this out there. I think the downfall of a lot of projects is probably audio. People don't bother to get good sound, and you need to bother.
That's true. Sound is the Cinderella of the cinema. That's what I was told, and I still don't understand what that means. Going back to the fans, are there any other kind of wacky questions that spring to mind that they've asked you?
You know, I keep thinking back to some of the amazing things people have asked. For Tremors 2, they want to know where the movie, they want to get the music for Tremors 2. The music was done by a wonderful musician named Jay Ferguson. And, you know, Universal has never released an album, and I don't know, I'm always frustrated because I think it's wonderful too. And I don't know what to tell them about that. That's frustrating. They want to know where the music came from in the series. The first song, and at one point I knew there's a song playing in the very first episode, in the very first scene, as the character's driving down the highway in his car. And I found out what it was. It was something strange and arcane that we got the rights to. And now that's gotten away from me. Let's see, I talked about, there's a recurring question. There's a subset of fans who really want to know what would happen if an ass blaster fought a shrieker, and then ass blasters ganged up on graboids. There's a whole, I don't know whether it comes out of sort of the Mortal Kombat world or what that is, but it's a recurring question. If a graboid fought, and then sometimes it'll go outside, if a graboid fought the alien, what would happen? And I always say to them, look, you write that movie, I have no idea.
And one of the great things about fans these days is, you know, they make their own. They're very creative. They make
they
their
are.
own merchandise. Have you looked at some of the things that the fans have made and that they're selling on websites like Etsy and so on?
Over the years, I've seen some remarkable fan-made Graboid and Tremors-related things. And I think, you know, they're sort of always frustrated by the fact that Universal never just released a bunch of action figures or anything. It's never licensed material about Tremors the way they do for bigger movies, and the fans just can't understand that. Where are the Graboid models? Which I would like to know myself. But I've seen Graboid wedding cakes. I've seen life-size Graboids sculpted out of sand on the beach. Just recently, I was shown knitted Graboids being done in UK somewhere. It's quite remarkable, and you know, it's delightful. You know, if Universal won't sell it to them, they make it themselves.